Hey, man, it's .NET rocks,
You're not doing
man.
that. You're not.
Why not?
They're not.
I don't know. It's just the way I feel this morning. I'm
It's
Carl
Monday
Franklin.
morning. Yeah, you've had a little too much weekend, I think.
I'm Carl Franklin. That's Richard Campbell.
Hi.
Okay, I won't do that again until marijuana is completely legal in all 50 states of America.
Oh, it's going to be a while.
And then hey, man. How you doing, Richard?
I'm good. I did have a bit of a crazy weekend, between my birthday, my wife's birthday, and many of our friends are all like this last 2 weeks of July. So we brought them all up to the coast. And it's, been a weekend of debauchery, honestly.
Yeah, your nose does look a little red, actually.
I'm a little pinked up.
Pinked up today.
Doing some damage, but
Yeah.
There's a couple of buddies up here that are literally known for 40 years. Like, that's what happens when you get old, right?
That's so cool, though.
Yeah, it's something.
Yeah.
How about you? You staying out of trouble? You're playing. I see your calendar. You're playing. Summertime.
Yeah. The band is currently just on a tear right now.
That's awesome, dude.
And we're getting our original bass player back in September. August 31st is our current bass player's last date.
Oh.
I'll tell you a little band story. So it was during COVID that Kevin, our original bass player, basically stopped coming to rehearsals because of COVID. And he had a good reason, too. He was immune deficient.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out he got leukemia.
Yikes.
He had, and his immune system was compromised because of all that stuff.
Yep.
He had to stay home, and he was like, "Guys, I'm out. I can't do this." And I want to protect my wife and child and all that.
Yeah.
So then he gradually got over it, and I kept calling him once in a while and say, "Hey, man, how you doing?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm okay, but I'm still not. I tried playing out a couple times with somebody else, and no, I'm still not." And then finally, he's like, "Okay, I'm retiring. I'm in, but not till September." And it turns out that I called him because our current bass player, Chris, basically met a girl, sold his house, and moved 3 hours away and married her.
Hopefully not necessarily in that order, but okay.
Yeah. But he said, "Don't worry, guys. I'm still in the band." And we're like, "Oh, yeah, right." So, but props to Chris.
Yeah.
3 hours. Yeah. Props to Chris. He didn't come to rehearsals so that, we couldn't really learn any new stuff, but we could send him a song and say, "Hey, learn this." And he was pretty good about it. And he never had a problem on the gig, but he showed up at every gig.
Nice.
3 hours away.
It's a lot of driving.
But I was going to say that the whole purpose of this was that it comes September. See, Kevin knows a lot of our original tunes that Chris doesn't know.
Right.
And a lot more than the Steely Dan songs, which we're known for.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be playing a lot more original tunes, hopefully in bigger venues.
Brothers.
Yeah, more Franklin Brothers.
It's cool.
Anyway, I've taken up enough time with my stupid stories of music and bands. Let's roll the music for Better Know Framework.
Awesome. All right, man, what do you got?
I can't believe I've never talked about this particular project before. It's curated by the .NET Foundation.
Okay.
It's Fluent Validation.
Okay.
It's a validation library for .NET that uses a Fluent interface. You know what that is. This, that, this, that.
Mm-hmm.
And Lambda expressions for building strongly typed validation rules, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So you can create these rules and then you can obviously use them, and it's very popular.
Well, and it's a way of building abstracted validation rules you might actually reuse rather than keep recoding the dang things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you decide to do it on the fly, where do you store that information?
Mm-hmm.
Where does it go? Does it go in a database? Does it change? How does it change? Who changes it? Like, there's so many things, but 8.9 thousand stars.
Yeah. Know it, learn it, love it, man. Like, that's clearly a great tool.
It's cool. And I'm going to start using it. I can't believe that I haven't even known about this existence before.
Okay.
So that's what I got. Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1891, which you did back in March of 24 with our friend Anthony LRB, he'd written that open source library for API observability.
Yeah.
Right. We had a great conversation with him. APItoolkit.io was his tool. I know we're going to talk about APIs a bunch today. And our friend Matt Lacey actually commented on the show. He said, "Hey, 10 plus years ago, I built something for API consistency checking on the client end. I assumed there was a potential business in it, but I couldn't work out how, because building good software and selling software are two different jobs, right? Like that's a completely different thing. Great to see API Toolkit in existence now and making APIs more reliable. Because that was our whole conversation, right? You change an API and somebody with a dependency on it suddenly goes down.
Yeah.
Like, you make people sad in a big hurry. And API Toolkit was all about doing that validation. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for being a long-time listener. And I don't know if you have a copy of Music to Code By already, but you do now. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And Music to Code By, for those who don't know, is something you can listen to while you're coding or to calm a restless dog or to put your children to sleep at night.
Here I thought that was the nuclear weapons geek out for putting children to sleep.
Oh, come on now. That was amazing. And it always is every year.
But that particular one, somebody told me, it's like, I was depressed. So I'm a little more level in that.
Yeah.
And I did almost all of the talking too. So apparently it's pretty good at knocking kids out.
Well, there you go. But hopefully we'll have something more positive to say this
Something
year.
Positive about nuclear weapons. Come on.
Well, Okay. Well, let's get into it. We're going to introduce our guest right now. I'm going to introduce our guest. Andrei Kamenev is our guest, and from 2016 to 2024, Andrei worked at Microsoft in various architect roles in Europe, helping customers to bring their applications to Azure. Now he works as a product manager at Azure API Management, all that goo that we were kind of just talking about, but in the Azure way. Welcome, Andrei.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Were you part of the quick start teams, those folks that helped onboard people into the cloud, did that digital transformation thing?
You mean the service by itself?
Yeah, wait, your earlier role before you joined the product team.
Yeah. So I was a part of what is called here at Microsoft Global Black Belt team.
Okay.
So it's like a bunch of cloud solution architects who help local teams like field engineers and customer solution architects in the EMEA region to build stuff with Azure. So our team was mostly focusing on Kubernetes related stuff. So I was working a lot with customers on bringing workloads to Azure Kubernetes Service, Azure had OpenShift, and so on. So yeah.
And so the move over to API management makes sense because that's a linchpin problem when you expose stuff on the cloud that was typically just on-prem before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've seen a lot of customers who are interested in APIM, even back then when I was not a part of APIM team, okay, I have a bunch of APIs on my Kubernetes. How do you expose them securely? What can you offer me, Microsoft? And then I think back then there was a self-hosted gateway, and it is still out there. It was a solution. So yeah.
So what are you working on these days?
Yeah. So these days, I guess, there is a lot of interest in GenAI, in large language models. ChatGPT is all over the place. So
goodness.
Right now I believe in May, we released the GenAI Gateway capabilities in Azure API Management to help customers build intelligent applications with LLMs. So yeah,
I have a great idea. Let's give our AI all of our API keys and let them do whatever they want to do with it.
Yeah, that's actually a better approach. that's one of the things that we're actually trying to solve for customers.
Right. I know. Yeah. It just sounds crazy, doesn't it? Given all the the AI hiccups and things that people don't really trust them. But I mean, so let's bust that myth. Why would we use AI to make our API calls, manage our APIs, do all those things that normally trusted folks do?
Yeah. So here, I think from APIM side, we have two different stories. First of all, we use GenAI ourselves to help customers write the policies that we have in APIM. And the second thing is we have customers who are building intelligent applications using ChatGPT models, using other models that are out there in Azure AI Studio.
Yeah.
And they have challenges. Because if you think about Azure OpenAI, for example, it is still an API. You still have the same challenges when it comes to managing and securing access to APIs. So we build, but they have specific kind of a number of challenges which are kind of specific to LLMs. So this is kind of the second part where we help customers to secure, manage, and scale OpenAI deployments for their applications that's what we call GenAI Gateway in Azure API Management.
So what are some of the ways in which AI can be used with APIs? obviously creating the management stuff around it, but would you necessarily trust an AI with your API keys and say, here are the rules and times under which you would make these API calls? And I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, I think, as always, it depends, right? So, if you have specific access controls in place, why not? Like if you, for example, with APIM, you can provide a specific keys for the LLM to enhance the experience for those who use those LLMs.
And you can throttle and all that.
Yeah, then why not? You're not given the access to full API. You're just given access to a subset of operations.
Sure.
Which are, for example, read-only, or they just have access to specific data that which is not really at risk. So, that's definitely a viable use case.
I'd be definitely okay with gets, but posts and puts.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because otherwise you'd have to make these rules yourself, right? I mean, that's the point here, is that you got a machine learning model essentially that's figuring out what the optimal rules are for utilization. Yeah.
So there is one thing. So as I mentioned, first thing, we've built an APIM, for example. We're helping customers with LLMs to configure APIM. Mm-hmm. So I guess you're kind of familiar with APIM. We have these XML policies, which can be pretty long documents.
Yeah. And typically you're doing the thing, you're trying to say no one user can do more than this many, or if it's growing, massively limit it so that you don't knock other people off, and make sure they're using the right accounts. It's just
forwarding.
There's
a lot of stuff in there.
You know where stuff is, and you know what failover modes look like. We've done a few shows on API management now, and it's pretty powerful stuff for, you're going to put an API in public, you're paying when somebody calls that. So you kind of want to put governance around that, but writing all those rules, when you really dig into it, it's complicated. So that was my first thought when I thought about what do I want generative AI to do, is look at what's actually going on and write me better rules.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the two use cases that we focused on with Copilot. First, we decided that, we know that writing policies is hard. We have 50, 60 different policy snippets to do, validate jot, retry policies, rate limit and stuff like that. So we decided let's have a way for customers to express in plain English. For example, I want to have a policy to rate limit this API for 5 requests per second. And then Copilot will just generate a policy for you. And then you just copy and paste this into the XML editor. And that's it. And another one is, as I mentioned, the second scenario, policies can become pretty long, 200, 300, and sometimes you don't even understand what's going on there.
In XML.
In XML, exactly.
Another recurring theme on the show lately has been why we hate XML.
Yeah, there's a use for AI right there. Hey, translate this XML to me in English.
Exactly. And that's actually what we do with the second scenario. So you can just select XML, whole thing, or just a policy snippet, and then you ask it to explain it to you. And the fun stuff, it's not only explaining just this policy does this policy does that, but it also understands the context. If you have different variables, you have context, you have, policy expressions, some logic in there. It also will explain that, for example, you are doing validate jot policy and you have this admin claim that you're checking. If you're checking this admin claim, if it exists, then you are allowed to do this operation. So it's pretty good in explaining policies, because we are not using the plain model, but we also using this, it's called retrieval augmented generation pattern, where we also have policy snippets that are stored in a storage. And this model can also use these policy snippets that we provided to better respond with correct policies with the better explanations and so on.
Yeah. So the same way I would actually write policies is I go cut and paste from well-written policies.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've trained a model on well-written policies so that it has a good chance of expressing better ones for a customer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I could see a few different things going on here at once, because and I'll include a link to this blog post here. You were also talking about using the APIM to manage utilization of the OpenAI service, because that stuff gets expensive.
Exactly, yeah.
Those tokens run away on you, and you're having a bad day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an interesting use case because, as I mentioned, we have customers who are trying out, they're building POCs, they're building small applications, and there's Azure OpenAI service, and it makes it really easy for you to start. You just deploy Azure OpenAI endpoint, you select, for example, you want to have GPT-4 model, and you're good to go. Like that's just an API. You get your API key, you import the SDK of your choice to your application, and that's it. You're sending prompts, you're receiving completions, everything's fine. But then customers realize that, okay, there are tokens.
Then the bill comes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There are tokens. And tokens is like something which is super important in Azure OpenAI and in general in LLMs. You spend tokens for prompts, you spend tokens for completions. And even when you deploy Azure OpenAI instance, there is a quota associated to your model, which is expressed in TPM, which is tokens per minute.
Right.
And then after all of these experimentations, customers, they started to realize that, okay, now we need to way to manage this because, okay, we've built our first POC. We have one team who developed this kind of a private preview app, which is not fully in production right now. But now we have 10 different departments, 10 different teams who also want to get access to this model. And now how can I manage that? How can I limit the consumption per team, per department, per developer? Well, how can I make sure that
assign costs out? Like my sysadmin hat is firmly on right now. It's like there's nothing better in this world than being able to bill out the resources to the individual teams for what they do.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue. Like you need to figure out how many tokens were consumed by a specific team.
Sure.
What kind of model they used, and then like okay, at the beginning you have one endpoint, but what if you want to have multiple endpoints because like you're going production, you want to scale. How do you load balance? How do you like create circuit breaker rules to make sure that, for example, okay, our first instance is throttled, it responds us with 429. How can I fail over to a different endpoint?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, there are a lot of challenges. Now you mentioned the given access API keys, distributing API keys to all of these teams also doesn't sound like a good idea. So that's why we've built like a lot of stuff that is in this blog post for GenAI announcement. We wanted to solve these challenges for customers who are kind of scaling and trying to like productize their investment into Azure OpenAI specifically, but also for other models like LLMs and stuff.
Yeah, certainly one of the experiences I've dealt with companies building out software into the cloud, even when they've got authentication and they're billing back to the customer makes a mistake with the API and racks up a couple of million transactions that were test transactions. Like they're not making money on the back end. Then you're sending them this ugly bill and they, want help. In the meantime, you've also gotten an ugly bill, because you ran it on the back end. So there's this whole game of like, who's holding the bag here? You don't want to punish your customer for making a mistake. If you do, you may lose them as a customer. You're not necessarily going to get remediated, back to Azure too. But although I've certainly had that experience where I've done stupid stuff in Azure and called them and go, like, I'm really sorry I did this. And they're like, yeah, fine. No, we'll wipe it.
Oh, you're the guy.
Yeah. That's
We've been waiting for your call.
What was that? But the business reality of this consumption model is you don't always get paid for the stuff that you used. Right. Or are willing to. Like all of these mechanisms to me speak to let's catch it. Why didn't you notice? Why didn't you catch it before it ran away? After the first million tokens, why didn't you stop me? And these are the tools, right? Like this is how this stops from being worse.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we were trying to make sure that customers have the right tools to have the proper kind of governance in place. So one of the things that you mentioned, like tokens, so we introduced we already had like rate limiting policy that works for requests. Like you can, say, as I mentioned previously, like 5 requests per second, for example. And now we had to build something for tokens, which is aware of these tokens, which is kind of the main currency of OpenAI, as I mentioned. So, we introduced this token limit policy. It works pretty similarly to rate limit policy. You can say that, okay, we have this application, we have this department, we have this team. Now we assign, let's say, 1,000 tokens per minute to this application to make sure that they do not consume more. And that works pretty well. And if you want to be extra careful, you also want to, you also can configure the policy to estimate the tokens which are in the prompt. So whenever there is a request coming with a prompt, and you calculate the number of prompts, the number of tokens which is used in a prompt, and then if we on APIM side understand that it already exceeds the limit, we will not send this to the backend.
Right. So you won't consume them in the first place because you're already pressing against the limit.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you bubble up that you've hit a limit? Like, what does that look like for the customer? What does it look like for the operator?
Yeah, so there is a pattern with rate limiting, for example. Typically, it's 429 returned. Retry after header with a specific like number of seconds to retry.
Right. That's with a message that says sorry.
Yeah,
only the Canadian version.
Yeah,
the Canadian version. Yeah.
And that's what we've built for this token limit policy as well. So whenever the limit is hit, 429, retry after a specific number of seconds or minutes, depending on how you configured it.
Right. If you're being rate limited.
Yeah.
I use the Google YouTube API, and I'm working on a new publisher, and it's going to be publishing to YouTube, just like we talked about earlier. And it's weird. I work for a couple hours on this in the morning, and I make several requests, and then I get the, quota exceeded, and I go to look at my quota, and it's like 10,000 API calls. I'm like, I didn't make 10,000 API calls. So it's just an anecdote, but yeah, I'm looking at the response for that, when I try to authenticate myself, and it'll say, nope, quota exceeded. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Yeah. And we're also trying to make sure that it is fully transparent for developers, because there is a huge ecosystem of different tools for OpenAI and other LLMs like Azure OpenAI SDK, LangChain, PromptFlow. Like there are a lot of different tools.
Yeah.
And typically developers, they start with direct access to OpenAI, because SDKs, they expect a specific like URL in the OpenAI side, they expect the API key and so on. So on our side, we wanted to make sure that this experience is the same for developer. So which means that if we put APIM between OpenAI and the developer, they will never notice that something changed. So for us, it was super important to make sure that the developer experience is still the same.
Don't break existing code, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's why we return 429, because that's what OpenAI does. We're trying to follow the same structure to make sure that everything works as it worked before.
Isn't one of the things that APIM does is if you have a process for the developer that includes several API calls, maybe to different services or different places, you can make one sort of master API that then makes calls and proxies out on your behalf to these other ones and comes with a single result. I've used that feature of APIM. There's just so much stuff. When I got into it, there's just so much stuff in there. We could probably spend 2 hours just talking about all the features of APIM. But you mentioned that Microsoft put out a white paper about some of these new features. I guess can we get a link to that? And what are some of the other amazing things that we might not know about that are in that product now?
There's a lot of innovation happening in APIM. So GenAI Gateway is definitely one of those things that I mentioned. We're also currently working on the enhancing for example, the workspaces feature that we have in APIM to make sure that each team has its own workspace with isolation, like control plane isolation, data plane isolation, and so on. Recently, we also released a couple of new SKUs for APIM, which are way faster to provision. They work better. They work on a newer architecture under the hood. There is a slightly different pricing model, but yeah, that's we have a lot of stuff going on there. To your point, for as you mentioned, it's really hard to understand what's going on in APIM, like a lot of policies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
With GenAI Gateway that we were discussing, that's also one of the challenges that we wanted to address. Okay, we have this intelligent application developers. They use ChatGPT. They know how to use that, but they're not familiar with APIM. And now we're asking them to write a bunch of XML policies to have the token limit, to have the authorization in place, load balancing in place, metrics for token consumption in place, and so on. So we wanted to address it, and we also we thought that it would be nice to have a easy experience for those developers in APIM to import existing Azure OpenAI APIs. So we now have this kind of a UI portal experience where you can just say, okay, I was using this OpenAI endpoint. Let's configure that one. And also I want to have token limit of, 2,000 TPM. And we can pre-configure everything for them. So they don't really need to care about the XML policies. They don't really need to look into those. Of course, if you need to change something later on, or you need like more sophisticated policies, of course, you need to learn something, but at least to getting started experience is super optimal.
Well, that's very Microsoft.
Yeah, I like the Copilot aspect here of also, I know I wrote this a month ago, but I don't know what it says anymore. Like it parses for me. Like, again, with my admin hat on, it's like often I have a service level agreement I'm making with certain customers that's written in legalese, and I'm trying to translate it into, heaven help me, XML. But the idea that I'd have an intermediary tool that would then take some out legalese to try and make the XML for me, and then after it's done, I could ask for it back and say, like, how close have I gotten here? I actually hit the rules that we've agreed to in the SLA. Like that translation layer has always been a challenging part of it. Is this always been about the money? Like that's the main thing that's happening here is you don't want to run it. I presume you'll always sell us more cloud, by the transaction. Like if you just keep requesting calls, that's fine. It's just then one day you're going to have to pay for it and it's not what you intended. So like, is that the important part in API management? Like I'm not worried about tipping over the cloud, am I?
Well, I guess it depends on your architecture, of course, but that's one of the things that you can put into APIM. Like whatever control you need, you can build it with the kind of a pretty powerful policy engine that we have in APIM.
That's cool.
I appreciate that. And gentlemen, I need to take a break for one moment for these very important messages. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franken.
Yo.
Talking to our friend Andrei a bit about these improvements to APIM, which we all should be using if you're going to expose an API through the cloud to the world. Don't leave it naked. Give it some armor. And this tool helps, these GenAI tools help us to configure it correctly, operate it well, but then also deal with the additional complexities when it comes to the Azure OpenAI APIs with issuing tokens for software to utilize OpenAI and put limits in place for all of those good things. Have I summarized that correctly, Andrei?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm starting to understand what you're doing here, man. I'm pretty excited.
Richard is the human AI.
Don't know that's true. It's
real
we definitely created, like you said, a very important phrase is sticking with me now, which is tokens are currency.
Yeah, absolutely. You can think about it as your main currency, your main resource that you have with all of these models. And that's also what you're paying for.
And it's what you pay. That's what you pay for. Exactly. And so, of course, it's a currency because it does ultimately translate into fiat currency of whatever form you're using. You're going to pay for that stuff. And then you get into that pay as you go models and you have all that choices when you have these controls over top of it. Yep. Can we talk a little about the semantic caching policies? That sounds like a way to save money and potentially improve performance. That's interesting.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting policy and a very interesting implementation from our side. So yeah, as you mentioned, so first of all, we solved the latency problem just with regular caching that already existed in APIM for a while. You can cache cache responses for specific requests. But with LLMs, it's a little bit different because your prompts can be different, but they're semantically similar. Right. And that's what we do with semantic caching. So there is OpenAI provides an embedding model which generates vectors which represent a kind of you can think about it as a kind of a semantic meaning of a specific prompt or a specific like string. And then we generate it for a specific prompt. And then if we realize that there is a semantically similar prompt coming in, we will check the cache and we will retrieve the response from the cache instead of hitting the OpenAI endpoint. So first of all, as I mentioned, we're solving the latency problem. So the response is getting to the client faster, but we're also saving on the token consumption because this prompt will never go to OpenAI endpoint while we have the response cached. In our case, we're using Redis for vector search. So that's where we store responses. So yeah, if you're saying hi or saying hello afterwards, they're semantically similar where we just return.
I immediately go to a scenario like imagine an incident has happened that has caused a lot of flights to be canceled.
That would never happen, Richard. Come on, use a real example.
Folks are trying to find out if their flight's canceled. So you're going to get many requests from different sources that are essentially the same thing. Is this flight canceled? You really only need to want to fetch that once. Now it's sitting in the cache and you very quickly respond, yes, all flights are canceled. But and what I like about a caching model like that is that it will evolve over time. You imagine other scenarios. Once those flights are gone, there's other flights but you're often only going to need to make that actual request back to the engine once and use it over and over again. So a good caching opportunity when you're going to have multiple people more or less making the same request, but in many different ways of phrasing.
And also a way to bust the cache once the flights are back to normal. Yeah,
the cache, rather than code it yourself where you have to, caching is not hard. Expiring is hard.
Yeah.
Right? Expiring is always hard. So
wait a minute. Why is that? Oh. How many times I've done that.
Although admittedly, and again, I'm reading here, this is an early version. This is your first sort of go at this. I think.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's an early preview version for now. We're still so there are a lot of customer use cases for that. So as you mentioned, that was a good example.
Thank you.
But then we also have, so basically whenever a company builds some sort of a chat service for answering questions, then you always have frequently asked questions. And that's where you're
going to build a fact table inevitably, but rather than you define it, let utilization define it with a cache.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you have a lot of tokens saved just with the semantic caching policy.
Yeah.
Also for internal knowledge base, that's also important. We have a bunch of, for example, support engineers sitting in a call center, and sometimes problems are similar.
Yeah.
And you're just doing the search through the ChatGPT and your response is returned from cache and you're not hitting the OpenAI endpoint.
Yeah. I was recently reading about folks that aren't securing these kinds of services properly and people discover them and just use them as their free version of ChatGPT, basically leaving that vendor holding the bag for the token costs.
That's a great idea, Richard.
Yeah, nice.
Glad I can't believe I never thought of that.
But they should have used APIM in this.
This is what I'm thinking. It's I'm not even talking about the proper utilizations and runaway API calls and so forth, but genuine nefarious use that somebody's like, oh, look, you've exposed chat to me and I can use it for anything. So I'm not even going to worry about your product. I'm just going to exploit your token availability to run the queries I want to run. And, you get to eat it. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's why, first of all, it's important to have something like APIM where you have API keys, which are on the APIM side represent specific caller or application. Yes. But also, there are certain tools in Azure OpenAI itself where you can say that there is a specific filter on the content that this model is supposed to respond to. For example, if you're asking it, if you're training it, in our case, we trained it to respond about APIM policies. If someone asks about the weather right now or something else, or summarizing a document which doesn't have anything to do with APIM, it will just respond, sorry, I cannot do that. I'm not trained to do that. There's a filter in place.
That ain't my job. Go find your own chatbot.
Yeah.
And that document one's particularly evil because that eats a lot of tokens when you shove a document up and say summarizes for me.
Absolutely.
Those are token intensive and an easy to mistake to make if you haven't boxed that interface properly.
Talking about some more of the new awesome features, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that customers have asked for that you've implemented in this next version?
Yeah, there is an interesting, I wouldn't say that it's a specific feature, but that's kind of a challenge that we saw in APIM. So we supported service sent events technology for a while in APIM, but we had some certain problems with that because that's essentially streaming. So when you send the request to ChatGPT, typically what you will see and experience that you're used to most likely is that it will be responding in chunk of text. It's not sending like you the full response. It's just responding it in streaming fashion. And turns out that customers want to use streaming because that's what users are used to. They want to see the same experience in their chat experiences as well, like in their copilots and so on, whatever applications they build. But there is a certain problem with that because whenever you introduce some sort of a buffering, then the streaming experience breaks. which is the case for APIM right now, because whenever you have a login policy or a monitoring policy, or you have a retry policy, so whenever you do a buffering of a response or request, the streaming breaks. So we had certain challenges to make sure that token limit and the token metric policies, they work with streaming scenarios as well. So that's kind of challenging, I would say. And that's kind of one of the things that customers request to add support for.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more features still to come down the pipe. Like there's a lot we could be doing in here. Yeah. Over time. Although honestly, when we started this conversation, like, I think you guys have already done too many things. Like sorting all this out is challenging. And I know there's still more that could be done.
No, there are certainly a lot of scenarios. Like as you mentioned, one of these scenarios is kind of content safety, just to make sure that we do not respond on specific, I don't know, if there is a specific question in a prompt, we should not respond to this prompt.
Which doesn't sound like an API responsibility, but you are at the gateway point where doing content filtering this is a logical opportunity to hit that.
Yeah,
it's definitely a different area.
Yeah, and actually that's something that you can do today. Like you get access to the request, you can look at the headers, you can look at the body, and then you can write whatever regular expression you want to deny the request. But that's to my point that policies are hard, especially for those who are not used to APIM. We just want to make sure that it's easy to use and easy to configure. So yeah, that's something that we're looking at, adding like content safety concerns are real. There might be like PII data. There might be some confidential data in the request to response. You want to filter this out, and Gateway seems like a natural place to do this kind of stuff, because that's the kind of a single point where you see all of your requests and responses.
Because the Azure AI Studio has a whole mechanism for content controls and so forth. So you kind of want to pick the policies you've built over there and then push them in a hook to the API side and say, here's our saying, I only want to write one set of policies, but I want to be able to catch them into different places where it would matter.
Yeah, there is also a big piece of kind of a governance and kind of best practices within an organization. For example, you can have multiple model deployments and they have different content safety configurations.
Yeah.
With APIM, you're just having kind of this platform engineering side of GenAI, let's say, where you can say that, these are our rules, and all of the models that are deployed, they should be behind APIM. And then in APIM, you configure all of the rules that you have in your organization to comply with this basically policies, whatever you have in your organization. So in that case, you're basically shifting the control to APIM instead of configuring stuff on the models level.
Yeah. No, you can see that associated with particular authentication accounts too. So it's like, hey, I provide a service for medical. And so some pictures are going to be the kind that you wouldn't normally want to show anywhere, but that's the business here. So it needs a different rule set. Interesting array of problems here, Andrei. Like you guys are up against it. I appreciate this. You've got AI Gateway samples on GitHub. Should I include a link to that? That looks pretty cool and super current. Yeah.
That's an amazing repo that was built by one of the GBBs that we work with. So that's basically a set of labs that you can try with APIM. So typically, probably you know that the typical like space for AI engineer is a Python notebook.
Yeah.
And that's something that we wanted to implement in those labs. So there is a bunch of Python notebooks, and then there is a code that is calling OpenAI through APIM with the Azure OpenAI SDK. So it's pretty natural for AI engineers. And then we demonstrate kind of a different token limits policy, a mid-token metric policy. Then there are a lot of additional stuff like load balancing and sending the augmenting the response with the rack pattern and so on.
Yeah, so it'll seem familiar pretty quickly. There's different people coming at this from different angles, right? You've got your service builder on the back end, wants controls and throttles and logging and that kind of thing. You've got your LLM folks who want to automate the flow and control of tokens. You've got administrators trying to keep things up and make sure billing's going to right places. anybody involved in cost control, which is lots of folks, like my experience talking to developers when they're starting to experiment in LLMs is they want the latest and greatest of everything. But the price, the technology may or may not be needed. And the price tag is huge for the latest versions compared to, hey, would this have worked with GPT 3.5 plus? Like, because it's a tenth the price. Like, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
But if you're not concerned about any of that, you just don't, nope, give me 4.0. I want it all.
Yeah. What's interesting with LLMs, it's actually the opposite usually. Usually like 4.0 is cheaper there than 4 or than 3.5.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's because they're more kind of optimized. So they say that they consume less resources, so they're more optimized. That's why it's cheaper.
Interesting.
So yeah, but that's actually a good point that we basically distinguish. We have internally we think about two personas. We have AI engineer who's kind of building the application, who's using all of the SDKs they want latest and greatest. And then we have AI platform engineer who is kind of providing access to those models, and he or she cares about the token consumption, like cross charge and load balance and all of this kind of stuff. And AI engineers, they also, they always want something new. And that's also kind of one of the challenges for us because this space is evolving like super fast. Like we are just trying to keep up with different models. For example, for all was recently announced, we are just working on adding the support for this model right now because it's multimodal. It supports images, audio, not only text like for GPT-4 or GPT-3.5. But then we're working on this right now. And recently they announced GPT-4 All Mini. So it's really like, it's really hard to keep up with the industry, and like there are a lot of open source projects building the gateways, building the capabilities that augment the LLMs. So it's a fascinating place.
Yeah.
Job security for you.
Yeah, sounds like
just trying to keep up, right? But I think that's part of the strength for the customers using this is to go, oh, new model arrived. Okay, well, it's in APIM, so we're okay. We can add the connection to that and go from there. But certainly, as they switch over to multimodal, like I suspect your inputs are different. It's not just a blob of text going anymore. Could be almost anything.
Yeah, that's actually also an interesting problem because, like, sometimes people think that, oh, okay, I have this GPT-4, and what if GPT-4 is not available? I will go to, I don't know, some different model, for example, Mistral Large. But in reality, you have the AI engineers will work a lot on the prompts and make sure that these prompts work with a specific model.
Right.
And typically, if you switch the underlying model, most likely the result will be not what you expected.
Right.
So it's important to like test it against multiple models.
Well, yeah, like you said, this is such a moving space. Heck, let's face it, you can fire the same prompt at the same model several times and get different results.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Like, we're not living in a land of consistency right now.
Brian McKay and I used to do this show called the AI Bot Show, and it was a YouTube thing, and he would have something to show, and he would be practicing it the night before we recorded, the prompts would be completely different, probably because it learned overnight
or
that
was modified.
Something that he could jailbreak today, tomorrow is impossible. Crazy.
Yeah, that's why prompt engineering is like, it's super important. Like whatever you build, prompt engineering is always going to be very important. And the thing is that like whenever you test it, it's not deterministic. Like you cannot say that, okay, it works, as you mentioned, it works today, but it might not work tomorrow.
And as developers, that really messes with our head because we're used to absolute results.
Yeah.
I think we're also used to building on an existing data set where so far they're pretty much tearing down these models and rebuilding them over and over and over again. So you can't expect that what worked before works again. That's just not the thing, because we don't revise models, we replace models for better or worse. I was describing pareidolia on a walk this weekend. That pareidolia is the tendency for humans to see faces in things, right? You look at a bowling ball and it's like, that's got a face, or the front of a car, it's got a face, right? Yep. And how that's an evolved trait of humans, because if you detected the face first in the trees, you were the one running before the other people were running, so you probably lived. And the downside, of course, is that when you see faces that aren't there, is very low. It's not a big deal.
Right.
So then we're talking about model building. I'm like, so imagine I take a shotgun and I shoot at a target, and then I say, do you like this face? Right now, if you say, no, I want a better face, I don't take the same target. I get a new target and I shoot it again. And that's, the nature of constantly rebuilding models is that you typically don't get the same results again.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was a very long-winded way of going about that. But I like saying pareidolia.
But I love that you introduced that word that I've already forgotten. Para something. But for me, that's like staring up the clouds, or ink blot tests, Rorschach tests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Humans see things that aren't there because it used to be useful, at least. Now, I don't know. It's creating its own set of complexities, no question.
Mm.
Well, how many versions out are you planned, Andrei? Like, I could see lots of demand from different folks for various features. Like, we talked about the whole content management thing, but what comes next for you?
Yeah, so we started with Azure OpenAI being kind of the one that is easy to use in Azure and kind of a most popular one. But we also want to extend to other models because there is definitely demand to use other models like Llama, Mistral, Cohere, Hugging Face, and others. So we are looking at how to expand our GenAI Gateway capabilities to support more models to make sure that customers can use multiple models in the same APIM instance without like the need to customize policies, write crazy policy expressions, and so on. Then there is a huge demand like on login and monitoring side. As I mentioned, we started with a token tracking, but it turns out there are certain phases of the intelligent applications development where you actually want to collect all of the prompts and completions to make sure that your model behaves correctly. And in general, login is pretty easy with APIM if you are not using streaming, if you're not using SSE events, because again, I mentioned there's a buffering problem.
Right.
So that's something that we're looking at how we can solve this in the future. And also kind of in general, like focus on security, traffic management, like prompt manipulation policies. Like let's say that this example that you shared that I just found some Copilot that I can use now for my personal gain. But what if I have some policy that says that, for whatever context which is presented in the prompt, I will rewrite it so that I know that my application works with it perfectly well.
Right.
So in that case, whatever you send as a prompt, it will be rewritten on the APIM side, and you will not get the response that you wanted from this Copilot that you just found out in the internet.
So it just occurred to me at the end of the show here that I should ask this question long ago, but is it possible to write two policies that contradict each other? And what happens if that's possible?
I believe technically you can do that, but at the same time, we have so policies are executed from top to bottom. So whatever you have at the bottom will be enforced.
Right. So it's order of execution.
Yep.
Which is pretty common.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It can lead to some confusion though. It would be nice to have something when you're creating those policies to say, hey, by the way, this contradicts this policy. You might want to take a look at that.
Yeah, we definitely validate policies. So we have the policy engine that validates if there's something like which doesn't make sense. There will be a validation error, so you will not be able to save the policy.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that's something...
Allow Carl to access this API. Don't allow Carl to access this API. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that.
Cool.
So yeah, and in general, like for the future of GenAI, so we are good at like security, traffic management, just kind of a general ease of operations and APIM. So that's what we are focusing on to make sure that customers have all of this kind of secure access control to those models, like all of the policies and governance in place. But at the same time, we want to make it easier to build intelligent applications. So whatever we build, we're trying to give those AI engineers like an easy to use interface if they're not familiar, to make sure that it's easy for them to set up, configure, and basically get all the benefits of APIM's GenAI Gateway when they're building applications.
Great. Well, it sounds like the end of the show. Andrei Kamenev, thank you for being with us. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to mention, or a shout out, or call to action, or anything?
No, I would say just make sure to check the Azure updates when we release new stuff, and look at the tech community blogs where we publish all of the latest and greatest in APIM, and
all right.
That's it.
Awesome.
Well, it's been great talking to you.
Thanks for having me. It was great talking to you too.
Thank you very much. All right. And we'll talk to you next time on .NET. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a